Hello and welcome to yet another video, and in this video it is something a bit different and also quite interesting, at least for me, because I'll be talking about this camera right here. It's the Canon EOS 850. Now this camera has been out for quite a while now, way back in 1988 I believe it was, but it is a program mode camera, and I've never really seen a program mode camera. I got this camera for €5 at a secondhand place and decided to just, clean it up and also kind of renovate it a little bit and then just start shooting with it because I really wanted to know what this camera has to offer. So in this video, it won't be a full review of this camera. It's just gonna be my opinion on this camera in case you're looking into getting this kind of camera just to experiment with yourself, or just looking for a second or third opinion. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So the Canon EOS 850, now this camera came out way back in around 1988, but I believe it was, and it also had other siblings like the 750 as well, but I'm not sure how many of this type of cameras Canon produced. I was just very interested in getting this camera because, well, I found it for just €5 at a secondhand store locally, and I just thought, why not just renovate it? And obviously at that time the shop didn't even know it was still functioning, so I just took the risk. It was only €5, so why not clean it up, renovate it a little bit, and just put in a new battery, and it works, surprisingly. And it's a very simple camera, and one that I personally haven't seen before, because I usually talk about either fully manual cameras or some sort of like plastic toy cameras that everything is already set for you because it's just made mechanically like that, or just like a fully automated point and shoot film camera, whereas this one is a 35mm SLR and everything is, I could say, automated as well, and it's just my first time seeing it like this. And the most ridiculous part is it feels more solid than something like a fully manual camera of like the Canon EOS 500, Canon EOS 300, things like that. It feels much better built and also more solid, and it's also beefier and heavier as well. And to a certain extent, it is also more reliable than those cameras, because those cameras sometimes has the shutter issues with being unreliable. But anyway, I'm going off course. I'm just still very fascinated by this particular camera. As usual, this is not a full review video. I will be breaking this video down into 3 different sections. The first one is the ergonomics and the usability of this camera, and also leading down to the second point, which is going to be the image quality, and then the third point is going to be my conclusion about this camera, why I recommend it, why I don't recommend it. So let's first start with the first category, which is the operational side, the ergonomics, the usability of this camera. So this camera, well, as I mentioned, just mentioned, it is built like a tank. It is quite solidly made. It is plastic, but it's a very heavy duty plastic. The metal mount here is also quite nice, because a lot of times fully automated cameras tend to come with plastic mounts as well. But yeah, with build quality, this camera, Canon really put in quite some effort into building this camera because it's well built, and everything is also very straightforward, very minimal amount of buttons. In fact, they're mainly just up here. There's not even like kind of a control dial to change your ISO or to change different kind of settings, let's say your aperture or your shutter speed. It's just up here you get your self timer, your program mode, your depth of field mode, your battery, your shutter button, and that's pretty much it. The L button is, well, the L icon is just your turn off or lock kind of icon. So once you press it to program mode, for example, that turns the camera on, and then you can just focus, and it has that beep, and then you press for that shutter to release. So yeah, it's a very simple, straightforward camera. Everything is just placed logically in this case, but nothing can really be misplaced, to be honest, because it's just a mode dial and a shutter button. And once you're done, just flip it back to the L icon so that you can actually turn the camera off. That being said, this camera is a film camera, so it doesn't require a lot of battery. So, you know, even if you left the camera on accidentally for a week, the battery will still be almost full anyway. And the battery, it takes the same battery as like the Canon EOS 1 or the Canon EOS 50, which I'm actually also using right here. And it proved to be, you know, quite a nice, reliable battery as well. It doesn't run out very easily, and it also performs quite well in even super high or low temperature environments. So that's actually pretty nice as well. And the battery compartment is really nicely protected by the screw. And I don't know, a lot of the build quality and the design language of this camera really points to that this is somewhat of a serious camera, because they did protect the battery door quite well, and also the build quality is quite well, even though it is plastic, but it is quite well built plastic. So yeah, the viewfinder on this particular camera is also quite decently sized. It's not small like the normal entry-level ones, but it's also not super large like the EOS 1 or the 5D series of cameras, things like that. But it's, you know, in between, and it's actually quite nice and bright as well. And even if you were to mount, let's say, a manual focus lens onto this camera, you will be able to manually focus it quite accurately because it is quite bright as well, the viewfinder. So there is that. But otherwise, there's not really much to say. The build quality is good, the handling is solid, although I wish that the grip wouldn't be so flat here, because yeah, it really dictates larger hands, things like that, to be gripping this camera. But then there is very little gap between the actual grip and also the lens itself, so it does cram your fingers a little bit, but everything else feels very solid, and everything responds very nicely. Otherwise, on to the next point, which is the autofocusing system. The autofocusing system on this camera, it works quite well, quite fast actually, but once you switch it to vertical shooting, that's when it's a little bit tricky for the autofocusing system to pick it up. Or if you're photographing anything with really plain colors, let's say if you're photographing a house or a building with just really plain pastel kind of area, and if you're only focusing on the pastel kind of area, it becomes very difficult for the camera to focus even in good lighting condition. So make sure that there's some sort of contrast within the actual area as well, so that the camera can focus on those areas quite accurately and quite accurately, well, in a decent speed, so to speak, because it's not the fastest focusing camera in the world. It's nowhere near as, you know, fast as, let's say, the EOS 50 that I have. This is the 50E, or the EOS 1, definitely nowhere near as fast as that camera, but it does get it accurately fast and also decently quick as well. So yeah, there is that. But the downside is you only get that center autofocusing point, so you will have to do a lot of focus and recompose. That's that. But yeah, otherwise that's it for that part. If you want to load the film, it's very nice and simple. Just put the film in here and then put the film to the orange mark, and then you close it, and then once you turn on the camera will automatically wind the film for you to the starting point, and then up here you will get your countdown, shutter count for your film. So that's actually quite nice as well. But otherwise everything is very straightforward, very easy, very simple to use. And now let's move on to the image quality. Well, the image quality out of this camera, being a normal SLR, you can kind of expect the image quality to be very, very similar to other SLRs that, you know, has decent build quality to them, because there won't be any light leaks. The metering is good. It's just that it does give me a little bit of nerve-wracking feeling that I cannot program as much or set as much settings as I would with my EOS 1 or my other SLRs, the EOS 50 here. Because with those cameras, I at least have more control. Whereas with this camera, the only benefit I can see with this particular camera for my personal use is the fact that it allows you to change lenses, and therefore I can actually change the perspectives that I'm actually taking pictures of. or the point of view that I'm actually trying to take pictures of. So that's pretty good. But otherwise, I feel like I'm, you know, flying blind pretty much. But otherwise, the image quality, it really depends on the film that you actually have in here and also the glass in front of you. Yeah, it takes great images if you know what you're doing, and if you know your camera very well and know how it would behave in certain lighting conditions. Yeah, the images will just be as you would expect, based on, you know, shooting with other 35mm cameras as well that are decently built. So yeah, there is that. Not really much to say. No light leaks, nothing to really be concerned about. The images that it produced, it's actually on a good side, not on the bad side. So there is that. The only part is because you cannot really always predict the metering system in here, being an old metering system, sometimes it gets it right and sometimes it's a bit too dark or too bright. That being said, the camera also doesn't really know what film ISO you generally have in here, so there is that. So please do be careful about that. And also when you're taking pictures with this camera, I should have said this earlier, but the shutter sound though, it's actually quite loud. And I wish that it would be a little bit quieter as well, because in street photography, everyone will notice you taking pictures because of the shutter sound. But otherwise, yeah, that's it. For the image quality, it really depends on the lens and the film that you have. If you have good films and good lens in here, it can actually deliver really good images with really nice characteristics as well. So yeah, there's that. Now on to the conclusion. Well, it's a camera that I would still recommend, despite it not really being for me. So if you like more control, this camera is definitely not for you. I feel very blind shooting with this camera, and I'm a guy who's coming from something like, you know, a Holga as well, and I do enjoy using this camera. I know that sometimes I can feel blind, but at least I know the settings, the rule of thumb with this camera on like roughly what aperture it is, roughly what shutter speed it is, and what like roughly ISO I have in there that I can always constantly calculate. Whereas with this one, there's a lack of calculation that I have to take into consideration, and then I feel even more blind because there's a lot of other possibilities that the camera could be calculating for me that I don't know. But you know, if you just want a 35mm camera that, you know, can change lenses and has good build quality for a budget, and you don't want to be thinking about, you know, what aperture you're shooting, what shutter speed you're shooting, then this camera is pretty much that. And you can just rely on the camera for the most part to just calculate everything for you. Yeah, so just keep that in mind. That is good for that. But for the rest of us who are really into more manual shooting, this camera might not be so enjoyable. But what this camera does offer is for you to just feel more connected with the environment, more connected with the composition, because then you will just, like, once you get used to the camera, you will just forget about which settings you're using, which settings that the camera could possibly be using. It's just going out there and literally snap with a 35mm interchangeable lens quality option. So yeah, there is that. Otherwise, there's not really much else to say. If you do have this camera and if you use it for other more unique purposes, please let me know as well. Otherwise, I thank you all very much for watching. If you have any questions, any suggestions, anything to share, feel free to also just type them down in the comment section below as well. Otherwise, if you need a free photography guidebook, it's absolutely for free on my website as well. The link is also down in the description section below. So as my free photography video courses and some niche paid photography courses as well, if you would like to support me a little bit. So you can also just see that. Otherwise, I hope that this video has been useful, somewhat at least. To me, I'm still quite intrigued by the existence of this camera, and I hope that you can actually learn something from this video as well. Otherwise, I thank you all very much for watching. Stay safe, have fun shooting. Till next time, bye for now.